Isn't it just the way that when something doesn't really matter and you're all relaxed, you come up with really energetic, impactful combinations of colours and marks that are very difficult to then translate into real paintings. I did this as a swatch for some new watercolours a couple of weeks ago, and I love the reds and purples together, and I love the energy of all the marks. So I wanted to use these in a real painting, and that's what's over my shoulder here. My name's Liz Chaderton. I'm a watercolour artist based in Berkshire, and every week I share tips and tricks that I wish I'd known about ages ago. This week it's how to use some of the mixed media techniques we might know with our watercolours and retaining that sort of energy and spontaneity. I am not a purist, as you may have gathered. This painting is done on canvas. So first of all, I prepared the canvas with watercolour ground. It's 80 centimetres square, which is 32 inches. If you don't know about watercolour ground, I'll put a link in the description. I then painted the elephant with watercolours and wanted a really flat matte background because the elephant was so colourful, it needed just something gentle and calm in the background. So I used acrylics. At this point, I wanted to integrate both things together and use some of the techniques that I use when I'm journaling and when I'm playing around. So stencils, marker pens, fine liners, inks, doodling, and that's what I want to show you. This is what the elephant looked like before I started making all those patterns. I felt that it was really too separate from the background. So I grabbed some stencils and some acrylic paint, and I started adding some patterns on top to really make it feel like this elephant was made out of exotic fabrics, and to soften some of the edges and overlap to bring the elephant into the background and the background into the elephant. I'm using a blending brush. It's actually a makeup blending brush, and these are brilliant for stenciling because they hold so much paint without releasing it very quickly. I use these for stenciling with watercolours, but they're great with acrylics as well. You can even use these blending brushes with inks, and it won't seep under the stencil, and it's just a game changer as far as I'm concerned. You can see that I'm tapping away, and I'm actually working on the floor because this is quite a large piece, so that I could work from the top and the bottom, gradually building up the marks and the patterns. I was trying not to concentrate on one area, and I'm skipping around it so that I don't go too far, because with this sort of pattern making, that's always the danger. The next thing I grabbed was a fine liner, and actually this is a grey fine liner rather than a black. It's a 0.5, so it's really quite thin, and this is simply doodling. So not just on the white areas, but all in different areas, I added marks that felt right. I wanted to give the impression of the gnarled elephant skin without actually doing every wrinkle, because that would take way too long. I just took my time and started to really enjoy the process. You will find that the canvases are pretty rough on the nib of your pen, so don't use anything that's too precious. Again, the temptation can be to get a bit too busy with your marks, so I've tried to vary them. In some areas they were quite large, and in others I did far smaller marks. What I've tried to do is, if I've done a mark in one area, to make sure that I repeat it elsewhere. Often 3s and 5s really work well. So if I've done this sort of, I don't even know what you'd call it. Anyway, what I'm doing at the moment, if you look over to the right on the blue area, just above the tusk, you can see a very similar mark there. So I like to repeat things, and that helps the eye flow around the painting. And you can always do more. It's very hard to do less. So far better to stop early than too late. Here I've moved to sort of smaller doodles just to fill in some of the white space on the trunk and to really emphasize the rolls and the marks there. And by this point, I'm really rather enjoying the whole process. Other thing I quite like to do is to outline some of the natural marks that the watercolour has given me. So if there are blooms and merges, to actually embrace those, not to think of them as mistakes, but just to think of them as something that's intrinsic to watercolour. So to outline some of those and emphasise some of them. If there's something I don't particularly like, I can also use some of this mark making just to camouflage it. When I've been painting the elephant, I had dragged my brush handle through some of the wet paint in places to make little lines, and I felt that this sort of slightly emphasised that and echoed it. I put in some more of those gorgeous eyelashes. Who knew that elephants had such great eyelashes? And I put those in with the marker, and also some whiskers under its chin, which was fun. Here you can see that I'm actually emphasising a few of the natural marks in the watercolour just because I thought they were rather lovely. Try to do some flowing marks as well as the more precise planned ones. So some lines and some wiggles that would just echo the edges between the different colours. It's nice to have a real variety in the size and the style of marks as you're trying to sort of create lots of interest, depth and energy. But you mustn't be frightened of having some quieter areas as well, because if it's all really highly patterned and textured, it just gets a bit too busy. So this sort of light area up the middle of the elephant is the edge of its ear, and I try to leave that as a fairly calm space for it. You can see here that I'm coming back to the trunk and patterning here. And that was what I was saying earlier, is that it's best to work around the picture as a whole, because then you can balance things up. If you did the whole trunk to start with, maybe you've done too much and you can't undo that, and it would be then hard to balance the rest of the elephant to go with it. It's time to move on to some acrylic marker pens. Always give them a good shake before you use them, because the ink really does settle out in them if you don't do that. I particularly like these brush pens or marker pens with brush nib, because you can use the side of them to make sort of teardrop or leaf shapes, and you can use the tip to make dots, or you can draw lines with them. So I find they're the most versatile of the marker pens if that's what you've got. I really wanted to make some of the marks and groups of marks overlap the edges of the elephant, because this method is very hard to get soft edges. And anyway, I mean, an elephant isn't a soft, fluffy animal, is it? But to really pull that background into the elephant was part of why I was doing all this mark making. And again, if you use a mark in one area, it makes sense to use it elsewhere in the painting so that your eye doesn't get stuck in one area. So I'm using this pale grey marker pen and repeating this sort of leaf shape in a few different places. And I think that just helps with the whole integration. Oh, I'm back to that fine liner. I obviously need another eyelash, and just adding there. Now I'm on to a purple pen and using the tip of it to create dots. If you do this sort of mixed media work, you will find that there's a certain mark that you just naturally gravitate to. And for me, it's circles and dots, and it almost becomes a signature. You know, every time I do a mixed media, I look and, oh gosh, there's some dots, there's some circles. But that's not a problem. It's just what I like. Some people like scribbles, some people like doodles. I'm just changing the colours and the position and adding more as I go along. I'm obviously not aiming for any sense of realism, but what I'm trying to do is to capture the spirit of this animal and to say something through the colours and patterns that I wouldn't be able to say if I painted it as a grey elephant with every wrinkle in a savannah. It's time to move on to ink now, And I have got some Kuretake gold mica ink, which I love. It's really metallic. It's got a great shine to it. I've put it in this pot with a needle nib, and that's a really fun way of actually applying it because it goes on relatively thick, but in a fine line. So it takes a while to dry, but it does give you almost a slightly 3D sort of feel to it. And I'm doing some general doodles here. I was really nervous at this point. There I was just trying to carry on some of the pattern making around the edges of this canvas because it's a deep edge canvas. But using this bottle, you can do very flowing lines and you can do quite controlled sort of dots. You do have to be careful that big splodges don't come out, but you can do quite fine detailing. I actually think I went a bit too far at this point, particularly on the trunk, and I had to do a little bit of camouflage later on. If the ink is still wet, you might be able to actually get rid of it with a damp cloth, or I just knocked it back a little by putting some more watercolour over the top just to take it down a notch. I felt I'd gone a bit too far. Generally, mixed media is actually quite forgiving. Watercolour can be a little hard in that covering up your mistakes can be tricky, but with mixed media, often there's something that you can do if you're not entirely happy. Now this is FW ink from De La Rowney. It's one of their metallic ones in a sort of palish gungy pink. And again, I've put it in a bottle with not a needle spout, but a fairly fine spout. So it's given me a thicker line with a bit more blob at the end, but quite fun to vary the width of your marks, the size of your marks, the style, because you're trying to add visual interest all the time. And I've put on some more dots here, as you can see. And again, these are quite thick. You need to be patient and let them dry and avoid smudging them. I did smudge a few, but again, I could wipe those off and cover up my mistakes if needs be with a little more acrylic. As you get to the end, you need to stand back and really look at the balance of things, work out where your eye's getting stuck, where you need to amend things. And having this on the floor actually really helped because I could stand back and think, oh no, I need a dot here or a little more stenciling there, and I could keep adding. So here's the final painting. If you want to see it in more detail, I'll put it onto the post section of my YouTube channel. I hope it has the energy, fun and enthusiasm that original swatch had.